All right, hey everyone. My name's Oliver Bruce. I am the co-host of the Micromobility podcast, and I work with Micromobility Industries on the Micromobility World Conference, which is coming up. You may have heard of it. So what we have today is a panel covering off, looking at all the things Luke had mentioned. We have one more panelist who'll be joining us in a couple of minutes, David Hyman from Unagi, the CEO. But in the meantime, what I would love to do is start off with all of our panelists and just ask them to do a kind of quick 90-second introduction. So just a bit about who you are, what your company does, and what you're most excited about in the micromobility space. And if we start off with Kelly, then we go to Eugene, and then to Alex.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Custer. I am the design director of Knack. We are an industrial design studio that helps mobility brands visualize their product ideas. So we're out here in Knoxville, Tennessee. Starting to get cold, but hopefully the warmth will stay on for a little bit longer. In regards to what I'm most excited about, we're a hardware design company, so I'm just obsessed with finding those opportunities to meaningfully differentiate. I see them kind of everywhere, so that's what gets me going, and I try to find ways that we can help our clients seize those opportunities.
Marvelous. Excellent. Thank you. Eugene.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eugene Kwak. I lead the hardware group at Lyft Transit Bikes and Scooters. We're based in San Francisco, California, with another primary office in New York City. What am I most excited about? Well, this industry really exploded. And I feel like there's definitely been more of a consolidation, a more mature cycling of what's been going on. So cities are definitely a lot more educated than they used to be. And the partnerships are extremely important. And really, what I'm excited about is partnering with cities and other players to really make micromobility part of the city's fabric, similar to buses and subways.
Marvelous. Thanks, Eugene. Cheers.
Hey everyone, I'm Alex Sutton. I'm the head of technology at Synapse Product Development. So we're a product development consultancy that helps major brands and startups kind of build new and innovative products. I've been involved in the micromobility space for about 4 years now and kind of helped with some of the initial launches of micromobility products. And I'm pretty excited for kind of what version 2 starts to look like. I think it's already starting to happen now, but really kind of thinking about how some of the technologies and some of the design aspects that maybe were overlooked or relegated in the first wave are now starting to come to fruition.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to discussing this with you, Alex. And we will have David join. I know he's just coming off another call, and I'll ask him to introduce himself then as well. So maybe what I thought actually would probably be the most useful place to start with this conversation would be with you, Eugene, and just to kind of ask, you mentioned, partnering with cities and then thinking about where the opportunity, working out how to make this tied into the fabric of a city, micromobility as a whole. And I'd love to hear from your perspective, what are the from a user perspective, what are the most frustrating issues holding back micromobility adoption? And then what sort of designs or technologies are you seeing that you could act as solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really what it comes down to is, first of all, when I view users, I'm thinking of two different classifications. I'm thinking of the rider as well as the city. So one frustration point from the rider, of course, is going to be around ubiquity. So I don't think they want to walk 20 minutes to find a vehicle. They'll probably be halfway to the destination by that point. So it's very important that a vehicle is there, within 2 to 3 minutes of wherever they are. So that ubiquity is very important. Additionally, we've heard this time and time again, safety is absolutely of the utmost importance. So vehicles need to be maintained. If a vehicle is vandalized, then they need to be replaced, removed and replaced quickly. So there are definitely some technology and design considerations that we can make here to help facilitate that. Building a vehicle for the right customer is really important here. So having something that's robustly designed for fleet use, can handle big bumps, getting thrown around while still surviving is really important. Additionally, sensors or diagnostic tools on the vehicle themselves, which can report issues. For example, if there are issues with the brakes or if the tire is flat, then operations teams can get out there quickly to either fix or replace the vehicles. So those are definitely relatively low-hanging fruit, I believe, that can help us overcome some of the frustration points with riders. On the city side, the two biggest points are around compliance and order. So parking, littering the streets with and sidewalks with vehicles that have tipped over, and people not following rules. There are definitely technological fixes on that front as well. I mean, you can start with something as traditional as fixed infrastructure, where you really place, fixed real estate where people have to park and dock. That would reduce a multitude of issues like the compliance part and making sure vehicles don't tip over. But technology could be implemented as well. So you have tools like within your accelerometers, you can detect whether a vehicle has been tipped over or not. You can look for ways, for example, if you take pictures of where you left the vehicle, you can use machine learning to confirm that the vehicle is parked appropriately. I think between these different technologies, we can definitely get to a point where we overcome these frustrations.
Yeah, I love how oftentimes the conversation with cities is along the lines of like, well, we want these things, we want all the benefits that they provide, and yet we don't want to provide any of the infrastructure. And you kind of look back at it and we go, what was the car like when it first came into the city in the early days? And if you go back and read those news articles from the 1920s, people were complaining about how these cars were like, oh, they're going everywhere. And from that, we developed car parking standards, and we developed order out of this. And I think there's also that conversation, right, about how do we get cities to say, like, we want this thing and we are willing to invest to be able to make that happen. Alex, I know that Synapse has done some work in this space. Is there anything that you wanted to add there as well?
I mean, I think, technology is probably kind of the bridge between, I think, what cities want and the reality of providing a service to the masses here. And so we did a little bit of work on kind of exploring low-cost sensors to kind of help augment some of the safety aspects of micromobility. And so, I mean, kind of echoing what Eugene said, I think there's a lot of opportunities to kind of really think about, like, what are the ways that we don't kind of take that power away from the users to kind of go where they want to and ride where they need to, but can provide just a little bit of a nudge, a little bit of guidance to make sure they're operating them respectfully, safely. And so, I think of how far cars have come in the last 20 years when it comes to safety systems. And I think sometimes there's a tendency maybe for cities to look and say, okay, well, let's just make micromobility like cars and provide that capability. Yes. And I think that maybe kind of missing the mark here. I mean, they're lighter devices. They are operated in different ways than cars. And so really trying to think about, like, what is the technology we can glean from the automotive market and apply it to micromobility in a way that doesn't dramatically affect operation costs, doesn't affect just the delight of hopping on a scooter and getting someplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to, there's a sort of a question there around the incentives, I think, for micromobility companies, both kind of owned and shared, to help reshape that user behavior, as I was talking about. Sort of, there's a technological aspect to it for sure, but shape that kind of user behavior and cultivating those healthy norms. Like, is there anything in there around where technology can help reshape what use of micromobility can look like? And I'd love Alex, if you could kind of cover off this on any of the work that you've done, and then Eugene as well.
Yeah, as a proof of concept, we basically kind of outfitted an existing scooter with some accelerometers, and then implemented a lightweight kind of machine learning solution to figure out when you're on sidewalks. That's not to say we're trying to sell that productized offering, but it was really more of a thought experiment of, if you had this and you rode it around for a little bit, like, that feedback, and our feedback was pretty ugly and crude. But I think it was a good way to kind of provide some general feedback that you need to change your behaviors a little bit. So we were focused on sidewalk detection, but it was pretty easy to kind of flip some switches and now thinking a little bit more about speed control or about kind of aggressive turns. And so really kind of, I think people often, there's so many distractions when you're on a scooter or bike. There's too much visual stimulation. And so trying to find kind of subtle but meaningful ways to say, like, hey, rethink what you're doing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I would definitely add to that. I definitely agree with you there. I mean, it's about education and enforcement. So even something simple as reminding people in the app, hey, there's a certain way you're supposed to ride. There are certain do's and don'ts. And yeah, I mean, people tend to not always read those things, but you do need to have them really on the vehicle, in the app, multiple locations, just to remind people and get used to the habit. And there are definitely some enforcement tactics that you can utilize as well. As Alex mentioned, sidewalk detection is a really interesting technology. It provides safety not just for bystanders, but it also prevents users from falling over on broken sidewalks, as an example. I mean, your speed is diminished, or if you have geofence locations where you prevent people from entering certain areas. Some people, especially as a first-time rider, you may not really know how to navigate, how to ride the vehicle properly, and there are certain measures that you can certainly take to either slow the vehicle down or send push notifications to warn the rider that they're riding a bit unsafe. So, for example, if the vehicle is bobbing back and forth, then sending a notification after the ride to remind the person, hey, maybe you need a little more practice in a parking lot or something.
You're useless at riding scooters. Like, come back and use ours. Come use it again, and then we'll let you use it better. It actually reminds me that there's a company called Bond or Smide, which is based over it was based in Europe at least, and they started out with 45km/h speed pedelecs, and they were very fast bikes, but they unlocked that only after you had ridden for about, I think it was 10 hours before you could unlock that. It started out as sort of lower speed and then got faster. And I think that's the kind of really interesting stuff that we can be looking at.
Dynamic profiles. Exactly. Dynamic profiles based on the user's experience or what their perceived experience is. You can set certain limits in terms of how the vehicle responds to their inputs. Yeah,
that's very, very interesting. Kelly, I would love one of the things that's been really interesting from a recent insurance study is that the majority of electric scooter accidents occur on sidewalks, and actually about 40%. Kind of going back to this, what Eugene was just mentioning, about 40% of those happen on the first ride, and I think in part of that's kind of come down to the fact that like the scooters, what we've kind of designed in terms of how we've designed them, they. At least, I think we're getting a little bit for designing for safety, but I'm kind of curious from your perspective, how can design and technology help prevent those kinds of crashes in the first place from happening?
Yeah, so I've unfortunately witnessed firsthand 3 of my friends, different occasions, all wipe out in their first or second rides. One of which was one of my friends slid into the side of a car because he was going too fast, couldn't react, wasn't in control. Another one, it's just really silly mistakes, but hitting a curb straight on, going over the bars, wiping out on the way to brunch. And the reason I bring those up is because I think there's 2 big problems here. One is just in that first ride, people aren't getting a chance to warm up and understand the handling of the vehicles. And then those 3 examples, they weren't the most sporty people, but they also weren't unsporty, right? They had athleticism in there a bit. So my point is, I don't think we can rely on people to, especially new ones, to understand the rules and best practices. I think we have to bake that into the vehicle. And I hate to say that we should slow down the vehicles because I love the speed of scooters. But like we were just talking about the dynamic, well, I don't remember what you called it.
Dynamic profiling, yeah.
Profiling, yeah. I love that idea, and I think that's excellent because, some people have the luxury of growing up riding bikes and motorcycles and whatnot, and other people, they're doing it for the first time, and they're doing that while, like you said, Eugene, trying to navigate a new city while they're on vacation. So I think we got to bake it in a bit and just don't rely. I think people are going to push the limits, and so we need to bake those limitations into the vehicle itself. And just don't rely on them to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Eugene, have you seen anything in terms of how, when you're working in the space and designing, how do you, what are the sort of specific design interventions that you can think of? What are the sort of design interventions that you have around improving the safety of the vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it gets really complicated because, I mean, you're trying to design a vehicle that's one size fits all from a design, like physical standpoint. I mean, whether you're 5 feet tall or 6'5", we need a vehicle out there, especially as part of a fleet system, that can account for everyone. So then the question really becomes, well, how can you make improvements then if you have to have one vehicle that has certain compromises along the way to adhere to everyone? So I would definitely turn more towards certain forms of sensors and software technology that can dynamically change or profile based on the rider's experience and their size. So I would say that yeah, really it's that form of technology that could enable and facilitate riders' experiences. And we try different things like within our labs as well, and we always take into account that every rider is different, but unfortunately there is no one size fits all solution in this case, and we keep that in mind, so we have to make those compromises.
Yeah, absolutely. I really the one, and I just love to ask this question because I oftentimes see people talk about it, but it's like having a larger front wheel on a scooter strikes me as being one of the things that I've seen happen as a sort of relatively basic safety thing, but simply being able to mount curbs and be able to hit things, it's a lot easier. It also means that you don't tip quite so much if you turn. Is that something that I guess, I don't know, Eugene, whether or not you can reveal anything about this in terms of your design. But yeah, I mean, has that been something that you've considered or seen, Kelly, as well?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I would say, absolutely, when you're thinking of these trade-offs, you have to think about the tire size, the wheel size, and how that's going to affect the dynamics on, let's say, a San Francisco street versus a more flat area like Los Angeles. Those are definitely some considerations we have to make. But then at the same time, it's like, okay, if we have a bigger wheel, then how does that affect maintenance? How does that affect the durability of the wheel and the tire? How will that affect braking performance and vehicle dynamics? So we're always thinking about these different trade-offs. And then, of course, as a business, we do have to consider costs as well. Who the suppliers are, what they're able to provide to us. That's a reliable solution. So we do that analysis, and of course we'll get different samples. We'll try them out in different environments. That's where user experience testing and just engineering validation testing are very important. And then we really have to come to a decision where it's like, okay, well, we know we have like 3 different types of wheels of 3 different diameters, and these are the different trade-offs from a rider's perspective, a safety perspective, a cost perspective, and really we have to make those trade-offs for what's best for our business and the rider.
Absolutely. Excellent.
Yeah,
Kelly?
I think it's a bit of a catch-22 as well for the user, because generally, yes, a bigger wheel, you can go over obstacles safer and with more ease, and it gives the perception of control. It's less kind of wobbly and finicky from the user's perspective. I think maybe the downside is it then makes it possible and encourages them to go over curbs and maybe more dangerous feats versus, being able to eyeball it and realizing, no, I'm not going to go that route. So I think it goes both ways, but I think that and suspension as well, right? It's like you add suspension and now suddenly, I can kind of jump that or hit this pothole and be okay. And maybe we don't want to encourage that.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I'd actually love to ask you, Kelly, is I noticed that. So, for anybody who hasn't gone and seen it, Knack has a great concept scooter called the Roll, which is a 3-wheeled. Was originally designed as an autonomous vehicle, so it sort of fold down, drive itself to you autonomously, and then pick up. Hey, David, how are you?
Hey, better late than never.
Yes, apologies. I'm sorry. I think we might have had a bit of trouble with the links, but anyhow, great to have you. Great to have you here. How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm doing really well. Excellent. Well, look, what I might do. Do you mind if I just pause here for a second, Kelly? And then if we do, David, if I could get you to just do a sort of basic introduction for yourself and Unagi, and then what you're most excited about in micromobility, and then we'll kind of pick things up from there. And
sure. All right. My name is David Hyman. I'm the founder and CEO of Unagi. We make the best portable electric scooters. We started out with a model that was completely focused around ownership and purchased scooters. And we've been having great success there. We just partnered with Best Buy, Costco, a whole bunch of others. Target came on board. But we're very excited about the subscription launch that we kicked into high gear in August 1st in New York City and Los Angeles, and we plan on rolling that out in the very near future.
Awesome. Great. Well, it's really excited to have you here. I've done a couple of podcasts with David, so I'm pretty excited about the subscriptions, the subscription model especially. Hey, David, if I may, I just want to go back because we'd be talking in the beginning around the frustrating aspects holding back micromobility adoption, and we were talking in live around, what are we seeing in cities, especially for shared operators, and the sort of the space there around things like safety and infrastructure and the sort of the infrastructure, what the lived experience, having kind of walking down a sidewalk and having scooters that are left out in front. But I really want to also kind of flip it as well, because you're obviously dealing with people who typically own their scooters or have them sort of on their person. Often they don't kind of leave them out on the street. But I kind of, from your perspective, what are the things that you're doing still holding people up in terms of being holding back the adoption of those scooters? Why doesn't everybody have one of these yet? And like what are you seeing in the market?
Yeah, I think there's probably a large segment of the population that's fearful and afraid to get on them, right? I mean, I would imagine everyone who's not riding one is probably afraid to get on one. And for a lot of those folks, electric bicycle is a better solution. I do think the electric scooter is the absolute best solution for 3 miles and under, going back to data that Horace Daydu shared with us at the first Micromobility conference, where he saw that bikes were really a better mechanism for 3 miles and up and scooters for less than 3 miles. Safety is definitely an issue. Quality of roads. I mean, all the things you probably talked about before I came on. For ownership, lightweight, I think, is a really critical component. I think the core market for scooters is in the urban areas. And if you can't carry it up a few flights of a walk up, it becomes a real deterrent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that's what Unagi obviously has focused itself on. Can you, do you want to just talk really quickly through the Unagi scooter? So just the sort of the key features of it in terms of motors and weight and things?
Sure. It's a scooter that weighs about 26 pounds, elegant marriage of carbon fiber, magnesium, and CNC machined aluminum. It's a dual motor design. So it's got a lot of torque and acceleration with peak wattage over 1,000 watts. And it's really hard to get that kind of power in something super lightweight. So I was looking for, a magic carpet that I could carry onto BART and could take me up the hills in San Francisco. And that was the goal.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's really useful. Thanks. We had just been talking right before you jumped on, David, around the design. So the use of and I was just about to ask Kelly. So Kelly, you designed the roll kind of concept as a 3-wheeled scooter, and I've sort of seen one of those that's kind of come out into the market, and I'm just curious about when you were thinking about that design process, why did you pick the 3 wheels and that particular design of having 2 at the front and 1 at the back, and whether or not, why you think it hasn't picked up or it might in the future?
Yeah, so the main reason for the 3-wheeled form factor with that concept, so that concept was trying to address a few key problems. The main one being, how do you get the scooter to show up at your door instead of going to hunt for one? Whether it be bad weather out or, availability, and then even like on the back end, the reharvesting and relocating. So in order to do that, 3 wheels just made sense, right? So you don't need a kickstand, you don't need self-leveling technology. It's just on its 3 wheels. So that's what dictated that choice.
Yeah, Yeah, awesome. Well, I certainly know, having talked to quite a bit with Dimitri, who's the CEO of Tortoise, who's trying to do autonomous scooters, that the balancing aspect of that, at the moment they've got a two-wheeled scooter and they put little wheels down on the either side and it drives itself to you. That has been problematic, or is problematic, in the sense of, yeah, it's just a hard design to adopt, really, going forward. But hey, look, Alex and Eugene, I wanted to pick up around one of the things, kind of going back to what we were talking about in the sort of broader trend. New York has just issued a RFEI where they're talking about, okay, we're going to allow scooters into the city, but they've allocated 50, in terms of how they're marking it, of the total marks come up under the headings of parking and safety. And you know, I see this happening kind of elsewhere in the world as well. Definitely did that. I know a lot of the larger cities as well are really starting to score as much on the vehicle as much as it is on the infrastructure, and thinking about safety and those aspects as well. Do you? I think they're just becoming more sophisticated. But how do you see? Or how are you thinking about it at Lyft, Eugene, for when you want to go and bid for this contract, in terms of being able to put like technological efforts into being able to solve for these things? Is this something that like the city themselves have to kind of sort out with infrastructure, or are there things that you can very specifically be doing and are doing when you're looking to bid for those?
Yeah, I think anytime you bid for a contract, you have to be the thought provider for the city. You have to give them some solutions, and ultimately they're going to agree or disagree with you. But you do need to educate them also on what's out there. And the reality is, not everyone is at the forefront of technology to really understand everything that's coming down the pipeline. And technology companies unfortunately have a reputation for making cities and customers or beta testers. So it's very important that you educate them and you provide them with the right information. You work on a measured approach where you're talking about pilot programs, providing them with data to understand what your intent is and what problem you're actually looking to solve there. I think cities are definitely becoming a lot more sophisticated, a lot more educated around this process. And partnering with cities, we're realizing that, hey, it's probably a combination of technologies, but as I mentioned earlier, parking infrastructure is something that cities are definitely leaning more towards. To really truly get that level of compliance and order that cities ultimately want to have, I think you're going to need some form of fixed real estate. I think technologies will certainly help bridge that gap, but it has to be a marriage of the two.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to ask that question for you, David, as well, because you obviously you're selling scooters into cities that are going to be adopting this, and so shared will be a big part of it as well, but owned will also be a large part of it. How are you thinking about it from a at the moment we don't have it, as far as I can tell, in terms of cities trying to certify these owned micromobility devices in terms of capabilities or anything. But do you see that coming down the pipe? And if so, what do you think the technological fixes might look like for that?
I'm sorry, for clarity on the question, are you asking if the cities will approve and certify ownership, or the city will provide owned scooters?
No. The first, yeah. So are they, and what would they do in terms of things like, in terms of sidewalk detection or requiring these things?
Yeah. I don't know the answer to this, but I'm very fortunate that there's a lot of people who are comfortable buying scooters irrespective of whether these are certified within their cities or not. I mean, we were selling, New York was our biggest market, before they even were considered. And we're selling a ton of scooters in London. Shockingly, these laws are also weird to me that I don't even understand them, but I'm told that only ride sharing is okay right now in London. So I'm thinking, gee, somebody spent a lot of money lobbying that. I guess it was either Lime or Bird, but how could they only allow shared scooters in London right now? But it doesn't seem to stop consumers from buying them and rolling the dice on their own. So it's a bit of caveat emptor, buyer beware. They take their own responsibility in their cities. And these cities don't even really have clear rules of where you can ride. People just, the whole electric bike phenomenon in New York City has been around for years with delivery people, even though electric scooters are completely illegal. Electric bikes have been illegal in New York City. It never stopped the entire market of delivery people in New York City from using the devices. So, you know, squishy gray areas. We just sell the scooters, and we hope that the cities catch up.
Yeah, I think there's certainly in the conversations that I've had with government, there've been a sort of a willing kind of, I don't really want to know what the problem is, and I think that that's not going to become an acceptable solution at some point in terms of scale. And I think that it is really interesting around what that is going to end up looking like. I think there will probably be some level of regulatory kind of intervention there. Alex, do you have any kind of insights there around how you've seen things work maybe in other industries that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, there's a cautionary tale from the drone world where, you know, it used to be you could kind of buy any drone off the market and operate it as you so desired, with the user kind of expected to follow the laws. I think about a year and a half ago, the FAA mandated registration of drones of a certain size. So it's kind of just a good example of where government kind of stepping in to kind of, they see that there's a risk to people who have not purchased the product, that, you know, that risk is to other people. And so, you know, I agree. I think that in an ideal world, it would be up to the buyer to kind of make sure they're prepared for the liability and the responsibility of owning a product like this. But the reality is the number of scooter owners out there is so small compared to the people who are not using scooters that their larger interest may kind of push cities to intervene sooner rather than later.
You know, I worked 25 years in the music space, and I was the CEO of Grace Note. We were the core technology that made all MP3 encoding. We were also the technology that Napster had to license to block all MP3 files. And it's very similar. It's like consumers do what they want to do, and you have to beg for forgiveness later. And it's, you're never going to get a fast-moving government to stay ahead and create the market. They just have to be reactive at some point in the future when the shit hits the fan, right?
Totally. I mean, it also as well, I think there's going to be such a, one of the things that I can also see as well is that there's such a, you know, at what level of government do you regulate this? Because it'll end up being, as you say, David, you know, there'll be different cities around the world will regulate this differently, and it'll be very difficult to get, I think, a kind of an overall vehicle standard, for example, or classification. FAA kind of Alex, but I do wonder a little bit about different cities and their ability, or sorry, you effectively have to designate an entire vehicle classification to these vehicles, and then really look at like regulating them down quite specifically at a national level. And I just don't see the appetite there at the moment in terms of regulation, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, I have limited experience in kind of driving this type of regulation, but I think my experience is that you know, it's less likely for cities to kind of take a blank sheet of paper and say, this is what the ideal product's going to look like. This is what we need everyone else to build. They're going to look at existing products and kind of look and say, this is what's really working. We like this aspect of it. And so, you know, as long as the providers of these products continue to think about the safety of the broader population, then I think there's a clear map of you know, cities trying to kind of adopt best practices that are already out there. And so I think the opportunity is really keep pushing on safety, keep pushing on respectful ownership. And so hopefully the regulations will be what you guys were doing 2 years ago rather than what you're going to need to do in 5 years.
Yeah. Keen so we've got about 6 minutes or so before I want to go to kind of wider questions. So I thought maybe what I could do is in the next sort of 6 minutes is I'm very keen to talk about blue sky thinking and sort of the kind of the wider, and I'd love to hear from each of you individually. In the meantime as well, if folks could just start dropping some questions into the chat or the Q&A, and we can start going through those in about 5 minutes or so. But everyone, if you, you know, in terms of what we can see that's coming down the pipe, in terms of what do you think has the greatest potential to completely transform the micromobility segment. So in terms of, things like, obviously I'm very excited about self-driving. I know, Kelly, you've obviously been thinking about that space as well. But yeah, what are the sort of things that you can see coming? And if I could ask you to kind of focus a little maybe specific to your area, so Eugene, if you could look at shared, David, to hear what you're thinking about in terms of what's coming down the pipe for owned, Kelly, anything that you can see in the design space or autonomous, and then Alex, anything that you've seen kind of across these wide areas given the remit of Synapse. So maybe if we start with Eugene, David, Kelly, and then Alex.
Sure. Well, within the shared space, I'd say that, a number of years down the line, what I'd really love to see, I'd love to see it sooner than later, is really autonomy. Self-driving vehicles would solve one of the biggest problems out there, which is, most of the accidents out there, safety concerns, are human-induced. Humans make a lot of errors, and that leads to different kinds of accidents. So if you're able to remove certain aspects of that, then you basically have a much safer ecosystem of vehicles, which in turn would gain the trust of the cities. And I think at that point you have a really viable, system out there that people can know and trust, similar to a subway or a bus. In the interim, in the shorter, medium term, again, I do believe in having a proper ecosystem within the shared space, so a multimodal ecosystem. Bikes, scooters, whatever combination of form factors that account for your urban travel. And I think having a reliable system with a proper infrastructure in place, that would include stuff like charging and locking, vehicle diagnostics and proper balancing and rebalancing of vehicles. I think that has a lot of clout to it to win favoritism with cities and really become a fabric as part of the city.
Yeah, fantastic. David?
There are a lot of things I can't say because we're a company that makes scooters, and I don't want to talk about the things we're developing, but I'll say, we're obsessed with portability. That's kind of our core tenet, and you're always making trade-offs, right? You're giving up range, you're giving up suspension, you're giving up a lot to make something that's very lightweight that can be easily carried. And we want to make less trade-offs. We want to use material science to further push what we can do as far as the weight. We're constantly looking for the latest technology for cells and power to extend range and remove range anxiety. We're looking for more power. We're looking for a lot more smart features and safety features. I think safety is, a lot of people don't put enough emphasis into how important that is in a consumer's decision when it comes to purchasing. And having something with really robust safety features, I think there's a lot of untapped potential addressable market there.
Yeah, marvelous. Thank you. Kel?
Yeah, I think what's got us the most excited, I know we touched on autonomy and self-driving. I think in addition to that, something that's already here today is virtual reality and augmented reality. So from a designer standpoint, that's a big tool for us, especially in COVID days now. We can collaborate virtually on the product development side of things. And it's really important when it comes to micromobility vehicles because you want to test out the ergonomics and the form factor and really, work through that as early as possible before you're making big investments. So virtual reality allows us to do that. And I think there's also an opportunity there. I know like a big hurdle for micromobility is, people are unfamiliar with it or afraid to just jump in and buy. So there's some opportunities there for maybe some try before you buy experiences where we could simulate, what it would be, especially like testing out the portability, like you were talking about, David, or just, even shopping. There's many opportunities there, and it's all exciting to be able to experience something before it ever exists. I think opens a lot of doors.
Awesome. Great. And Alex?
I guess you guys all took what I was going to say, which was autonomy. I think that is really the kind of the golden endpoint for micromobility. I think on the path there, there's going to be some really interesting developments in the near future. And it might even kind of change how we're actually defining autonomy for micromobility. I mean, I think about where, how much money the automotive players have poured into their self-driving systems. And they haven't gotten there, but they have spun off quite a few amazing innovations. I mean, self-parking, integrated LiDAR for accident avoidance and detection, more advanced radar systems. And so I imagine we're going to start to see some of that, where the rider is still in the loop in many cases, but really trying to think about specific problems that some level of autonomy can solve, rather than jumping straight to the hey, I just want to hop into a robo scooter and have it take me where I'm going to. So, I mean, I think, kind of on-edge machine vision, more precise location. A lot of these things are mature enough now. I think a little bit is about trying to design the experience that allows them to kind of be safe consistently. I mean, that's, I think, always the biggest challenge is people use scooters in so many different ways, scooters and bikes in so many different ways. And so you can envision one experience that you've designed well for. You get them out into the field, you realize that people use them in a completely different way. And so it really does come to me down to, how do I employ this technology that makes it fail safe? If I'm offering safety as a service, I need to make sure that it's fail safe in all the ways that it could possibly be used. So I think there's some interesting things around radar. Costs have been coming down dramatically. LiDAR as well. And just thinking about how to use them intelligently and sparingly to improve the experience.
Yeah, it's been, I've just got the new iPhone 12 with the LiDAR, and I've just been playing around with it, and it's incredible that that used to be a $70 sensor equipment, and it's now just on like a top-end cell phone. It's just kind of crazy to me that we got that far. There's a question that comes in, and I think probably Eugene and Alex, you might be the best equipped to answer this, but how reliable are current sidewalk detection technologies? Enough to take vehicle speed control and to kind of adjust vehicle and speed control in real time?
Yeah, so I mean, at least from my experience, the technology has come a long way. I don't think it's at a point where it could be fully deployed. There are just so many different types of scenarios that sidewalk detection can really be. I mean, whether you're riding in New York or more suburban area, you're going to get different types of faults in the sidewalk, which may lead to some false positives and spurious results. I think with machine learning that it's really come a long way, and it's only going to continue to get better. But I don't think it's ready for prime time yet.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anything to add there, Alex?
Yeah, I have similar concerns. I think the reality is that the rider is putting themselves in just a touch of danger when they're out on a city street. And so knowing that they have the ability to hop on a sidewalk to avoid someone who just opened their car door without having to go over the handlebars because the device, dramatically slowed down. There's too many specifics and context that's hard to capture and deal with in the real world. I think we can make things more advanced. We can provide users a little bit more feedback. Definitely keeping users in the loop, but that type of autonomy scares me a little bit. Yeah, right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's also as well, in some ways, I always ask that question a little bit about is that you just absolving yourself of responsibility of the cities that demand that from actually building proper infrastructure at which these things can operate? It's sort of why are people riding on the sidewalks? Because they don't feel safe. So, but that's a harder conversation to have sometimes with the city. Yeah. And actually, that was one of the questions that came through as well. So mostly European cities, planners have started incorporating the nudge method into street design, so that the easiest, most intuitive thing for roads users to do is also the safest. And how do you see the role of street design versus that of technology in making the streets safer for micromobility users? And Kelly, I'd love for your perspective on this if you've got one.
Yeah, I think it's tricky. I guess it's pulling off of Alex's point there, what I don't like about nudge technology or something like that is, especially from a new rider, it's invisible technology. So you don't know, what's happening until it happens. I'm assuming the nudge is a little less intrusive than, a stopping a mechanism. But Yeah, I don't know. I think as far as the roadways versus the appliance itself doing the work, I think it's a push and pull. And like we've been touching on, I think it's just going to be an iterative process for them both to kind of catch up and be the best versions of themselves.
Yeah, I can certainly see the role of this NACDO, the North American City Transport Officials, have put together what they call the city street design guide, and it's all around building proper infrastructure and what does this look like. And they built a global one, so the idea is that in actual fact you can kind of streamline street design around the world. But this is a sort of 20-year project or a 50-year project. It's not a next year we can deploy it. Kind of project. There's a question here: is the provision of full suspension a consideration? And David, I'd love for your perspective on this, given that the Unagi doesn't have the suspension, or it has the kind of interesting ideas of suspension.
Yeah, I mean, we use air gaps in our puncture-proof tires as a form of suspension. But again, you know, it goes back to what I said earlier. It's all about trade-offs, and you know, I've ridden some really beautiful full suspension scooters. They're quite heavy, and they're really more niche market for the suburban rider. We would love to provide more full suspension without adding to our 26-pound cap limit that we've put on ourselves as a company. 26 is just about the limit of what you can carry. And yeah, suspension adds weight. So we're doing a lot of thinking in a lot of different areas to provide better suspension at 26 pounds.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, it comes down to, as we sort of alluded to, the infrastructure, which is if you want to, it just sort of defines the area that you can use that scooter. I remember when you and I were interviewing David, you were in Taos, New Mexico, which is not exactly as scooter friendly.
I'm here right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not exactly scooter friendly in many ways with its dirt roads and
No.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, there's a question here from a gentleman called Adam. I work for a local government in the UK, and I'm responsible for a shared e-scooter trial in 2 cities. We launched only 4 weeks ago with Voi as our operator, and it's proved incredibly popular. We've got a budget of about $1 million to trial next generation e-scooter concepts. What should I be thinking about trialing? And he's left his email, which we'll also we can put to you. But I'd love Eugene, maybe if you've got some ideas, given that you're specifically in the shared space, and then anybody else who's just got an idea of maybe what they could be thinking about in terms of e-scooter concepts.
Well, to be honest, I don't know the UK market that well. And $1 million, you said $1 million roughly?
Yeah, they've got about $1 million to trial next generation e-scooter concept. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really, with $1 million, you have to be really careful about the budget. It's really easy to blow a budget, especially $1 million. There, I would really be careful to think about what's already out in the markets. Look at what the big players are doing. You have like Ninebots, the Okais, and you have the smaller players like the Unagis who provide really great vehicles. So the question is, which vehicle is the right type for your specific use cases? Really building something that's safe and reliable should be the 2 most paramount things, especially if it's fleet-based. Because I mean, the repercussions of not delivering on either one of those are absolutely huge. So as they're thinking about the thought considerations, I would not focus on what's the cool new best feature. It's really, how do I make this vehicle really easy to ride, and how do I keep the rider safe in all situations? That's what I would be focusing on.
I have an idea. We launched our subscription service in New York and LA, and we are just crushing our forecasts. I would love to partner with a city with a subscription offering. It comes out to $1.40 a day for a subscriber. It's an extremely efficient way to deploy scooters and get them in the hands of people within a city for a reasonable price. So the scooter could use its money solely for marketing. And there could be a rev share with the city between Unagi and the subscription revenue that is generated.
Awesome. All right, Adam, if you want to drop us a line and we'll work out how to connect you to David and you can have that conversation. There's a gentleman here by the name of Dan who he says, I run a startup with demonstrated collision detection technology for e-scooters. How might a solution provider like myself best connect with those who might benefit from such solutions? And actually, I kind of want to open that into a wider question, which is there anybody who, well, in terms of thinking about this, are there ways at the moment where people can where you're seeing an API style thing where people with different solutions could come along and be able to plug into scooters kind of as an think about it as like apps to an operating system, whether or not those sort of capabilities are going to be coming down the pipe and either in the owned or shared space. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Eugene and David.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's sort of like an open source modular platform where you can try different technologies to see, how viable it is. I definitely like the idea. The only concern I would have around that is what exposure do you leave yourself open to, like what vulnerabilities if people now have a launch pad into your system. So I'd be a bit concerned about that, but at the same time, I personally like the idea a lot. I think that it has a lot of merit, and I think there are a lot of great companies out there that are working on innovative solutions, not necessarily for the scooter or the bike space even. They might be working with UAVs or other industries in general, and they're able to take that innovation and bring it over to this space. So I think absolutely there is a market for that, and I'd be interested to talk to people that have some great ideas on that front.
Excellent, great.
Same,
David
David at unagiscooters.com. I would love to see whatever he's developing. We're looking at a lot of this stuff, and some of it is ADAS. We've got an in-house team with experience using TensorFlow and building AI inference engines. Aside from just object detection, like vehicles, you think about being able to build AI systems to identify road conditions and potholes and geotag so that you can provide kind of like rerouting options and better ways for people to get around for places that are really shitty to ride. Google Maps, you click the bike icon, will send you down a path that's not necessarily a fun path to ride on with an electric scooter.
Cobblestone.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, cobblestone. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, I mean, I'd love. There's a question here from someone, and it's asking around user behavior as a challenge in a way. What technologies could be leveraged to positively influence user behavior, both on owned and shared micromobility? And that's a question for everyone. I mean, I think in part that's that question about routing, right? Like, what could you be doing to just send them down different routes that actually don't put them in as much danger or other things? Anything else that you can? Anybody, feel free to take that one.
I mean, I think there's, we've been kind of thinking about audio augmented reality for a couple of different market spaces. So really trying to think about how do you layer on a voice assistant to the ride so you can kind of provide a little bit more feedback in a more easy way to interpret than lights, bumpers, or review at the end of your ride of here's all the things you were doing wrong on that ride.
Yep. There's someone here who's just asked about I saw, and it's kind of going back to what we had just talked about in the Blue Sky session, Blue Sky section, but I saw a 9-bot video online that had autonomous self-balancing scooters, or the self-driving, I think it was the T60 scooter. How far off do you think these autonomous scooters are in the US? Maybe we'll go with you, Eugene.
Yeah, sorry, I've actually ridden that vehicle. No, I think these first steps are very important in terms of getting to the ideal state where vehicles are autonomous and the right safety provisions are in place. Technology, it's still a very nascent form of technology right now, and I know there's still human intervention involved on a very high level with that technology. So again, while I think there are a lot of learnings that we can have and how people react to, there's two parts. There's the technology itself and the reliability of it, and there's the social interaction of it. So how do people react to seeing an autonomous scooter? My first thought is, well, if you're in certain regions in Asia, people will probably be bewildered and take a look. When I think of the US, I think of people purposely knocking it over. It's culturally it's very different, and people react to these kinds of autonomy and the unknown technologies very differently. And I think you have to understand that space first before you even employ a technology like that. So to answer your question, I think the technology is nascent, and people in general are definitely not aware enough at this point to fully embrace it.
Yeah. Kelly, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think with that being said, I totally agree. And I think the bigger challenge is the community adoption and acceptance, right? With our role project that you mentioned, Oliver. I mean, we kind of secretly did it as an excuse to cause a stir, but that was the big thing was, holy crap, you're going to have all of these scooters driving around themselves. Like, there was a bit of hysteria there. With that being said, I think it's great that we're making these small steps, especially with scooters, instead of cars, or there's those grocery delivery vehicles. I think great way to start familiarizing people with them, building the trust, testing the technology, and making the small steps, because I'm excited for that future. But yeah, it's going to be hard to get everybody else excited about it.
Yeah. We don't do, I was just going to say, we don't even think about it. We don't consider it. It's not ever brought up in any of our product development meetings. I think there's so many lower level fish to fry to develop for this market. Unlike cars that have had 100 years to kind of gestate and develop in the market and are now moving towards self-driving cars, like scooters have a long way to go, I think.
Yeah, I think as part of a shared micromobility program, it could be game changing. I mean, we talked earlier about parking, and I think Kelly also mentioned kind of being able to kind of call up a scooter, not having to walk to get them. And so when you think of this as transportation as a service, that idea of I can put my parking spaces in a warehouse that's a couple blocks away rather than right where users are. So I totally see your point of view, David. But I think when I think about the shared space, I think it is a game changer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, more for someone not on the scooter, where you're trying to move the scooter from point A to point B, than somebody actually sitting on the scooter.
Yes.
Yeah. So we've got about 3 minutes left. There's here. Well, we've got quite a lot of questions. We're not going to get through all of them. So there is a question here around, do you expect any standardization to occur in scooter hardware, i.e. standard batteries, to in turn boosting opportunities such as battery as a service? And I wonder if that could exist between both shared and owned, and curious, Eugene, if you're thinking about it, if you've got anything in that space, and then David, if you've looked at that space at all as well.
I mean, so from my perspective, I think there are definitely technologies that are going to be shared. For example, the battery chemistries that are used, or certain radio modules that are used. I think there's going to be a lot of that sharing, and we're only going to help increase the growth and the advancement of those industries because we're all utilizing their technologies. It's trickier if you're talking about, hey, let's develop one battery pack and use it across all of our different vehicles, across all the different companies. I think that's a bit more difficult. I think every company has their own intellectual property that they build in their differentiators, and I think for that reason, I think while the technologies can be shared, I don't think the actual SKUs and the builds will be used, across different companies. Not at least on a wide-scale adoption. Yeah.
David, has shared batteries come up with you in terms of like potential options for being able to have people change the batteries out as they're driving around a city?
Yeah, it's interesting to look at the electric bike market as a more mature market. As a scooter maker, I feel fortunate that my industry has not been standardized like bikes, because bikes have been flooded with scooter companies, because it's really easy to make an electric bike. You've got the Fang and Bosch motors you can buy, you've got derailleurs you can buy. All you need is a frame and a couple of guys, and you're buying parts and you're releasing an electric bicycle. That's why there's like hundreds of bike companies. That kind of standardization in scooters has not happened. There is no standard part, really. And as a maker, I feel somewhat fortunate. It kind of provides some level of a competitive barrier from folks coming in and easily, creating 100 new scooter companies. I selfishly enjoy that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's been no discussion. No one's ever called me up from another scooter company or any third party entity wanting to create a body of standardization across all of us. Never got a phone call, and
you're not going to make the phone call
I've
yourself.
Never made a
so
phone
yeah,
call, but
yeah, fantastic. Well, I think that's us on time. Is that Luke?
Yeah, jumping in here. That was a great conversation, guys. And judging by the volume of responses, you definitely hit a chord. Cool. Thank you guys so much for being here. This was an awesome conversation. I was pleasantly surprised by how far it ranged and how comprehensive it was, considering there was so much to kind of go over. Thank you guys for being here. Thanks to the audience for being here. We'll have a recording available, which we'll share with you guys over email shortly. Have a great rest of your day, guys. Stay healthy, stay well, hang in there, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks very much.